Welcome to the Pacesetter Pod, where we explore and reveal the perspectives, insights, and approaches to deliver great results and growth in your agribusiness through better execution. Here's your host, the Integration Pacesetter, Joe Mosier.
Welcome, Pacesetters of Agribusiness, to another episode of the Pacesetter Pod. I'm your host, Joe Mosier. Thanks for tuning in today. A quick reminder before today's episode, if you haven't done so already, now is a great time, the perfect time to subscribe to the podcast and ensure that you never miss any of the content or conversations that we publish each week to help you deliver better results in your agribusiness through better strategy execution. You know, one of the things that I continue to learn about and focus on and read about is startups, particularly in the agribusiness and the ag tech space. And I'll admit, startups just kind of fascinate me. You know, the idea that you bring an idea, a novel solution, something different, you bring it to life. You create something that didn't exist beforehand. But this fascination, this interest of mine isn't limited to startups that are focused on creating a new technology or a new novel solution or even creating a new market. I'm also interested in startups that aim to sit within established legs of the supply chain and do very familiar things, though maybe in unfamiliar ways. And an illustrative example of this, of course, is the continued build-out of soy crush capacity across the United States. Yes, there are headlines around how the large incumbents are building new crush capacity and how established folks in industry are investing in upgrading existing facilities. That's all true. But there are also these new market entrants that are jumping into the fray, jumping into a very mature supply chain, a very well-established set of partners that originate, process, and distribute these agricultural products. And as part of this, I just wonder, how do these folks make the decision about, one, just to build and enter, where to build, what to build, how are they going to operate, how are they going to differentiate, and even how do you go out and get the talent and leadership you need to bring this thing to life? Because even with the most state-of-the-art and modern facilities, you still need people to run these assets. So just a lot of questions. And so in that vein, I'm really excited today to share with you my recent conversation with Erik Lightner, who's CEO of Platinum Crush. Platinum Crush is a new state-of-the-art soy crush operation based in Alta, Iowa, in the northwest corner of the state. And they're now entering their second full harvest season here in the fall of 2025. We cover a lot of ground in this conversation. A few things I want to highlight for you that I think are particularly interesting. We're going to talk about the dynamics of not just building a plant, but also building a plant paced with building the business around it and the team that's going to lead it, and the unique challenge of that. The power of a reverse trajectory career, going from working in large organizations and getting bigger and bigger jobs in smaller and smaller companies. We'll talk about the burden of choice and designing and building new assets and Erik's approach to making those capital deployment decisions, kind of the buckets he looks at and the lenses he looks through in making decisions. We'll talk about the experience of standing up a business, again, in the middle of an established, in the case of Alta, Iowa, an intensely competitive trade area, what that's been like. And then we'll really get into the idea that agility over bureaucracy is not a privilege exclusive to smaller companies. It's not an advantage they inherently have, but rather agility, not bureaucracy, is a set of choices that you make every single day in your agribusiness. So thank you as always for being a listener, for being a member of the Pacesetter Pod community, and for being a leader in agribusiness that's taking a wide lens and thinking about how to improve strategy execution in your organization. With that, here's my conversation with Erik Lightner of Platinum Crush. Erik, welcome to the Pacesetter Pod.
Thanks, Joe. Appreciate the invitation to join you on the pod, and look forward to our conversation.
Very much looking forward to it as well. We've had, a number of folks on with soybean crush and processing backgrounds before. We've even had some soy crush operations on the show before, but the Platinum Crush story and stage of the business and evolution is a bit different. And so really excited to be able to have that perspective and that story be part of the Pacesetter Pod library and content we put out there. And I'm sure our listeners will get a lot out of it. And with that, let's just jump right in. So you are CEO at Platinum Crush, which is a soybean processor based in Alta, Iowa. Give us the 101, Erik, on what Platinum Crush does. What's the background of the business and why northwestern Iowa?
Sure. So it was really the vision of our development partners and our board of directors as global demand for soybean products continued to grow, specifically soybean oil into biofuels like renewable diesel. Platinum Crush was founded in October 1st of 2021 by our group of independent investors, making it unique in many ways since the U.S. crush industry is dominated by the large multinational corporations and has been primarily closed to private investors. We're here in Northwest Iowa, sited on 440 acres in between Storm Lake and Alta, Iowa in Buena Vista County. Construction started in early 2022 with land development and pre-construction activities, and the overall build of the plant was completed in May of 2024 when we started operations. This plant can crush up to 40 million bushels a year of soybeans, producing soybean meal, crude degummed soybean oil, and the various fiber products. It's a business that employs 55 to 60 full-time team members, operating 24/7, 355 plus days a year, and has strategic partnerships with various different service providers, contractors, and local businesses. Alta was chosen primarily for a couple of reasons: a very ample and robust local supply of soybeans, a Class 1 rail access, direct access, and really an extraordinarily strong local meal market. So in that order, when we look at it from a soybean supply perspective, we're in Iowa District 10, which produces just under 90 million bushels a year of soybeans, with our county, Buena Vista, producing about 8 million, or almost 10% of that. So dropping a processor into the middle of a production area that is as robust as this opens up a lot of opportunities for us as the crusher, for our partners, suppliers, farmer producers to give them optionality of where to sell their beans, but also allow us to work closely with some of the commercials that are in this area on an annual basis. Our soybeans typically come from about a 70-mile radius. We've been through one full harvest, 2024. So we've been able to cut our teeth and really understand year one supply chain and how to improve that going into year two. You know, the soybean quality within this growing region is consistently excellent. High yields from a farmer perspective, high yields from co-products, and especially, again, on the oil side. Mm-hmm. From a logistics standpoint, we directly connect to a Class 1 CN railroad, allows us to go north, south, and east with ease, with still connections to the west, so we can go in any direction. And we've got great destinations, whether that's the Middle Gulf, the Southern Gulf, the river export markets in the St. Louis and Mound City area. And with CN as a partner, it allows us to get into various different areas of Canada that also open up some export opportunities. They're a good business partner for us, so we also have a reverse relationship where, based on their network and, again, other growing regions outside of our local, we can bring a lot of extra beans in here if market conditions dictate. Talked a little bit about local meal markets. You know, where we are, and within a 45-minute drive, are 5 of the 8 largest feed mills are centrally located to the plant, and it has the largest footprint of grain-consuming animals in the state of Iowa. You know, we talked a little bit about harvest. Our first year, we received 5.5 million bushels of beans in a 16-day window. That's just under 15% of our annual crush, and we had multiple days of greater than 500 trucks, while only operating about 10 to 11 hours a day of receiving hours. So, you know, where we're at and what we're here to do, we've originated beans from 19 counties and 4 different growing regions. So that's a little bit about the background of Platinum Crush.
No, I thank you for that. And I think that, you know, that sort of that trifecta, or the three-legged stool of how those location decisions are made. You talked about both just abundant, proven, high-quality production within that district, as well as the surrounding districts, of course, the CN access, and then the robust meal demand. I think that's a helpful sort of set of criteria on how you locate on that. And we are going to come back later. One of the questions I do want to ask you is, given all those factors, they were pre-existing. And so certainly there is pre-existing competition for those bushels within the geography. So we'll obviously come back and talk a little bit about how does an independent startup like Platinum Crush both capitalize on those market dynamics, but also then productively compete with the other folks that are already there. So we'll come back to that. Well, before we start to jump into some of the lessons learned and things that you've been working on in the process of helping bring Platinum Crush, bringing it to life, literally and figuratively. We talked before earlier this summer, you've had a wide range of experiences in your career, both in terms of, this is my language on it, but in terms of the scope of your responsibilities, the technical focus areas that you're actually overseeing within businesses, but also geographic assignments, right? It's been a wide global and domestic sort of career. You're also one of those guys with what we sometimes call a reverse trajectory, meaning you've ostensibly found yourself in bigger and bigger roles, but also in sometimes smaller or more hyper-focused businesses, where maybe the conventional path in the past was you move up just within one organization, or you're looking for the largest organization, et cetera. All that being said, can you maybe talk to us a little bit about your path? How all those experiences fit together is probably the real interesting aspect here. And then ultimately how that shapes the work that you're doing today.
Sure. Everybody has their own individual and unique journey. And I've been blessed to have a 30 plus year journey that, started at Penn State University as a chemical engineering major and an athlete that took me to, I worked for ADM for over 20 years and was able to see multiple locations, work within multiple processing business units. Being a chemical engineer, starting as a production assistant, you go on shift and you run shift, and you might then look at certain projects or help during shutdowns. So really a ground up view. The way I was born and raised in Western Pennsylvania, it was all about hard work. I don't have the specific farm story that many others have, but growing up, son of a union sheet metal worker, it was all about work ethic and grit and discipline and consistency. So, that helped form that early on. And really, I couldn't have asked for a better place to go within ADM. And even as the journey of those 20 years, each of those opportunities, not just location, but purpose, really stood out. So, I think this is now my 9th zip code or country code, many of those with ADM. So I was able to start in soy crush and then go into vegetable oil refining, into packaged goods and specialty fats, and cocoa and chocolate manufacturing, and corn and wheat flour milling and packaging, and even dabbled on the corn processing side of it. So, really had a great opportunity to be one of the first that was able to operate, learn, and continue to advance in all those different ones. I was based in London, so worked in the UK, worked in Europe, based in Singapore, worked in all across Southeast Asia. And so we got to see the world through various different lenses and different perspectives of time, with a growing family and the relocation and everything else. So you really got an appreciation for the macro side of it. We made the change to a company called the Haskell Company when ADM divested the cocoa and chocolate business. Haskell at the time was, a growing company, a medium-sized design, build, architectural engineering, construction firm based in Jacksonville, Florida, that was definitely on an upward trajectory. And being that it was adjacent to what I had done on project management and operations management and business unit management, it was a gamble. You bet on yourself. You leave the industry that you've grown up in to go to a whole different industry. But again, each of those lessons learned through ADM, whether it was the projects or the people or the geographies, set you up for that. And Haskell had and has tremendous aspirations for continued growth. That fit who I was. I believe I fit that culture. And, I had a great 7.5 years there, delivering projects and management consulting and, conceptual pie in the sky, greenfield projects, but also, right down into, we don't have a big budget. We're going to do brownfield projects. So being able to do that and continuing to do that on a global basis, was a tremendous opportunity, and being higher and higher as within a company organization and more responsibilities was a great learning experience for me. And I got to watch a lot of great people. And, so the opportunity presented itself here with Platinum Crush. I was employee number one, hired by the board, and started in April 2023. So, the easiest part of the job was building the assets. There was construction contracts in place, land was procured. A lot of that was done. So the easy day to day is doing what I'd always done and watch an asset being built. But the real challenge was building the business and building it intentionally and at the pace of which the asset was being built. Have the business ready when the plant is ready to run. And that covered everything. Coming from ADM to Haskell, there's infrastructure, there's IT systems, there's finance systems, there's health benefits. We had none of that. And nor did we truly have a roadmap. There's other independents like us, but, we're just building those relationships. So it truly was like starting from scratch to determine that. And there was a few high moments and there was a lot of low moments, I would say, in those first 6 to 8 weeks until, a little bit of inertia started being built, and we built some velocity on hiring, leadership team. And, the people that I'm blessed to work with have a very similar reverse trajectory, to where they worked in. A lot of us came from ADM. A lot of people came from Cargill, but they came into a smaller organization really to have a thumbprint on it. And I think that's what we all really wanted to do, is to make an impact and a positive influence.
I love that observation of, you can't build the business faster than the plant is being built, right? Almost you're pacing the development of the organization with its actual physical capacity to do what it's designed to do. I guess, was that clear to you as part of the challenge coming in, Erik? Or was that something that came into focus either over time or in some specific acute moments where you realized, oh, I'm actually trying to push this further down the field than we can actually deliver against, and I need to adjust accordingly? I mean, how did that become so crisp in your mind as it is today when you kind of reflect upon it?
There was no light switch. I knew going in what I was getting into. And I think that's because of those past experiences of building greenfield plants for ADM and building brownfield plants for ADM and supporting clients as they were building new businesses across the world. So I had a co-pilot seat. Many times I had my hand on the wheel of how these things transpired. And there was a bit of a period in between. So I interviewed and was offered the job in November of 22, but didn't start until April of 23. And I really reached out and leveraged my network and talked to 30, 35 people before and after I accepted the role to get perspective. I had been out of ag for 7.5 years, and I'd been out of U.S. domestic ag for the most part for almost 20. So I needed to understand that landscape. But I always knew what the role would encompass, maybe underestimated some of the peaks and valleys along that. And that's probably just a personal situation of managing your own emotion and expectations. But the assets were so far ahead of where the business was at that time. There was more trepidation of, could I build the business thoroughly and responsibly and make good decisions without feeling the rush of, well, I only have 6 months before, the first bean gets crushed. And
right.
One of the very first things I did to put that in perspective is I had a graphic, and I used it at every board meeting for, 4 board meetings. And it was a depiction of an airplane, and it was the takeoff, the cruise, and the landing. And it helped ground myself, but I tried to also visualize and articulate that for others of, there's a lot more to it than building construction. And, here are all the things that have to happen, and they have to hit and intersect within days of each other. One can't be that far ahead of the other, or, you still can't run a business.
Yeah. Well, I just think perhaps I'm going a little esoteric here, but there's a lesson there in, again, building the business to pace its capabilities. And one of the things that we've all experienced, and you hear leaders, new leaders, experienced leaders, folks in startups, folks in turnarounds, et cetera, will struggle with is the idea I'm trying to activate the business. I'm trying to get people aligned and ready to execute the strategy. And we're having a hard time getting traction. And it seems like it's like I said, it's an activation problem. But sometimes, in fact, it could also be that you're pushing people to activate when in fact it's not time yet, right? So it's not a deficiency of execution, it's a timing error. And so I think that, I guess I'm not surprised that there's learnings along the way. I suppose if you didn't have any learnings relative to the timing of activities, then it wouldn't be a very interesting job and you probably wouldn't be the right person for it. So, but let's dig into this idea of, you talked about some of the decisions and choices you had to make. I've run facilities before. I've never built a facility. We have supported clients that are commissioning new facilities. And so we're helping in those final stages of getting the lights turned on and opening the doors and making sure that you have the SOPs and processes in place, et cetera, to successfully serve your customers on day one. But having run businesses, we all sit there and armchair quarterback all the decisions and sins of the past, right? Why did they put the turn head there? Right? Why did they build a six pack when such and such bin structure would have done just fine? Right? You don't really know how decisions were made in the past, and you live with the wins and the losses from those past decisions. But I've also heard that when they have the luxury, the opportunity, and frankly the burden of greenfielding, designing from scratch, and you carry that burden of choice, and all your sins will be on display if you get it wrong, right? So there's no universal right or wrong here. But I guess in that process, and you said the business or the plant was already well along in the development process, but to the extent that you were involved, how did you take your experiences working at the Haskell company and your prior experiences at ADM as an engineer and helping design plants? How did you bring that to bear, where you could actually say, okay, we're going to make pragmatic, effective decisions rooted in the reality of what this is going to be like when we run it, because you don't have infinite capital. Mm-hmm. And again, you're confronted with all those choices right up front. There's no one else to point to and say, they designed this wrong.
So I would say my primary focus was really on the appropriate balance of capital deployed versus what cash could be generated by the business, right? So when you really look at what are the earnings potential in the market environment that you're in, you look at the costs of a construction in the cost of capital and interest rates environment you're in. And I divided it up into basically four aspects: the operational assets, the storage assets, the infrastructure, and the logistics. So when we look at the operational assets, already chosen technology, tremendous supplier, known globally, standard size plant. So the core processing plant was appropriately sized for the market share that we felt we could competitively obtain and fit into the U.S. crushing industry. Where we differentiated perhaps from others that were being built or that had been built years ago was really in the storage assets. So we deployed a lot of capital towards storage, primarily for soybean storage. So we can store over 5 million bushels, just over 5 million bushels of beans on site. And that has a tremendous market value here in this local environment and community, specifically towards harvest, but it does give the benefit to the business. When we look at infrastructure, how do we support that storage asset? Where do we deploy our capital there? Is it just in the receiving capacity? Is it in the loadout capacity? Is it in the utility capacity to potentially in the future further expand? So I think there was a lot of forethought in the balance of infrastructure to storage with a known processing capacity. Logistics, I think that comes down to roadways, rail tracks, rail car fleet size, and little things you don't really think about. Where is the placement of the probe station and the scales, and how is the flow of traffic going to be managed on site when at harvest we have over 500 trucks bringing beans to us? At the same time, at a 120,000 bushel a day crush, we've got 50, 60, 70 trucks of products that are leaving. So again, I think that space planning, there's areas that I can sit back and go, well, if I had the pencil, on the original blank piece of paper, how would I have laid it out? Sure, we could have differences of opinions or other things. And if you really get a chance to do it again, do you change things? But one size doesn't fit all. But I think for the most part, it's a pretty standard soybean processing plant, but has tremendous infrastructure, storage, and logistic advantages.
Poorly executed mergers and acquisitions destroy more value than they create. They can set your company back years. To defend your firm's position in the marketplace, you need access to the leading practices that unlock the greater potential of your people, processes, and systems. If you are undertaking a company transformation or pursuing an acquisition as a vehicle to grow, set up a call with Joe by visiting www.moshercg.com.
So I love that framework around the operational storage, infrastructure, and logistics, and sort of having those categories of the type of capital deployment bucket, let's say. So you're seeking balance, but you're not seeking necessarily equity among the four of them, because there's some that are going to be more capital intensive than others, meaning, a roadway is going to be different than legging capacity. Did you go in with sort of a sense of what the relative allocation from one bucket to the next would look like, or you just simply map out the entirety of it and try to back into what you think a reasonable expense or investment level is? I'm just curious how the thought process works. Maybe not the minutia of the decisions, but just how you tackle that challenge. Because again, you're employee number one. Mm-hmm. You don't have a huge team around you. You probably don't have an engineering COE in-house or center of expertise. You are the engineering COE. But even making those decisions and then selling those decisions to the appropriate stakeholders, any other reflections there?
We all know soybean crush is a very high capital investment to enter this market. This was a plant that was built for just under $400 million. And as we see cost of construction, new plants, more recent plants, that number's higher. So when we really looked at it, it's what are the must-haves, what are the needs, and then what are the wants of the business. And on the processing side of it, they were almost all must-haves. But we did have a lot of change orders. I think coming from a technical background and operating plants and being a shift foreman for a period of time, and the team that we build and the experience that they have, there were a lot of opportunities for improvement over a standard process design. So we deployed capital in that direction that we felt would give us operational efficiencies. We delayed capital in some of the infrastructure improvements, and we accepted the fact that let's get up and running, let's generate cash, then we can go back and redeploy non-core processing assets, and we're just now beginning some of those phases. So for a standalone entity like us, it's a high fixed cost business too. We can be very competitive on variable costs due to the efficiency of our assets and the process that we have. But, we have to manage fixed costs in some regards differently than my past experiences, right? You didn't have, in those environments, you had scale that you could spread out fixed costs across. Here, everything hits the P&L, and there's no helping that. So we really looked at it as, how do we improve variable? How do we dilute fixed? How do we focus on the process? And how do we take any of those wants that we have that don't generate a return and delay those without negatively impacting the business until a time where, we can redeploy capital on infrastructure improvements or logistic improvements or other areas?
Well, you sort of are leading right into my next question that was coming to mind here. But before I go there, One of the things I think is, from the outside looking in, really attractive about it is you're now running a business without these pesky corporate allocations, right? Where you're sort of kicking up and wondering what exactly happens to that cash. But you also don't have this fortress balance sheet standing behind you at the same time, where if you get into a tough spot, there's capital to be accessed relatively easily, let's say, depending on the nature of the challenge. But so kind of on this idea of being able to do things differently from a variable expense perspective and being agile, the large commercials, the ABCDs, let's say, and even that next tier below the largest grain trading and processing houses, they've long held a large share of the crush capacity in North America, both for soybeans and soft seeds and et cetera. But we are seeing, and not just in the last couple of years, but even the last 10 to 15 years, this kind of steady drumbeat of small, regionalized or even single location operators like Platinum Crush entering the market and competing despite the lack of scale that you just pointed to. I guess my question is, with so much gross investment over the decades already deployed by all the majors out there, what have they missed, or what have they failed to do? What have they chosen not to do that has created the opportunity for geographically targeted or hyper-local processors like Platinum Crush to actually stand up and take that market share? Because it seems like it could have been a business that was already won and it was settled history.
I think if you take away total bushels crushed, what is the margin environment for the co-products? If you really look at the fundamentals of the business, what we focused on very intentionally was origination and operations. And we didn't want to lose focus of the work we have to put in on a daily basis, on a weekly basis, right? Our whole team is here in Alta, Iowa. People have moved here. People live locally here. We are all in the office every day of the week and every week of the year. So it's all about relationships. I had a former mentor of mine tell me, coin it, relationships matter. So for us, it starts with the origination of soybeans and growing and developing local relationships with our partner farmer producers and the trucking firms. We have done that through pulling multiple levers. We've been active in the community. We've been hosting of events. We've just tried to lift up that level of communication and the get to know you type situation, in this community. Like I said earlier, there's so many beans grown in this area and it was such a high, longer term export market, not just leaving the US, but leaving this growing area to be processed somewhere else. So we really focused on what that was. And I think that was a core strength of ours. It is. And we built the team intentionally with those type people in mind. I think that the infrastructure that we chose to deploy capital on is different than what the larger firms will do. The larger firms may look at that as, well, that doesn't give me the return, right? The return is the bushels crushed and the margin associated. But this was a very pragmatic approach of customer satisfaction with those farmer producer drivers, haulers. Get them on, get them off site, be able to store, give them something, a reason. What's their why to want to come to us rather than go to the more established, whether it's cooperatives or other soy processors in here. So we offer a competitive basis value, but we're also in the business to make money. And I think you can balance that. So that's probably, I wouldn't say what they've missed. I just think coming from the larger group, bringing others in from the others that are in the ABCDs and the next tier, we all just took a holistic look at it and said, what is important for us? How do we want our culture to be defined by others outside of us? And that guided us on what our priorities should be and led us as a North Star is say, here's who we want to be in the community and here's the relationships we want to develop.
Yeah. So thanks for that. I do think it was alluded to in your answer, but even just the reality of everybody sitting in Alta, Iowa, right? We're in this world today where so much is done virtually. So much is, we deal with bits and not atoms in many industries. I mean, ag is still physical asset, physical origination, physical processing, et cetera. And it's very easy to, I think, and I've done this before as well in my own careers, but you can pencil out the value of something by stripping away activities that are done locally, or changing your physical footprint in a geography, or changing the assignments of where people set, right? Because it doesn't make sense to have Julie sit in this office, answering the phone and taking questions about scale tickets when we can do all that in our hub location and in a smaller mid-tier city, et cetera. But that's not necessarily universally the right thing. And so I think that's, not saying it's the wrong thing either, but looking at those differently has a lot of value. One of the things that we hear a lot from folks that have worked at larger organizations and gone to smaller organizations too, is they'll comment on the relative agility of the organization, right? You can make a decision today and actually see it happening in the plant that afternoon, right? So two-part question here. One, is that true? Are you actually more agile, you think, on a relative basis? And if you are, is there a general example you could point to that sort of illustrates what that agility looks like? And I ask that for the benefit of other folks that are thinking about their own career aspirations, but also setting expectations for what is realistic in terms of agility within an agribusiness of whatever size it might be.
What I grew up in on the ADM side, I felt a lot of agility, a lot of opportunity for that agility. And that may be a blindered response because I came out of operations and it wasn't a corporate function. It wasn't a financial or accounting function. And just really the way my bosses and their bosses and my peers, how we operated. And to see that on a global basis and the expat assignments, there's tremendous a requirement to be able to be agile and nimble because you don't have 12 hours or 8 hours or something to call back and get recommendations or permission. So, transitioning from that to Haskell, where there was a lot of really openness to idea sharing and creation, and into what we've intentionally built here. I mean, this is our sole purpose. This is our job. We're passionate about it. We don't have distractions. We don't have a corporate initiative that could be a distraction. It could be extremely valuable, but you start allocating time rather than allocating focus, and you drop the core ball that you're trying to juggle. We don't have other businesses. This is our core business, and we've joked many times that if bureaucracy entered our organization or there were silos that were built figuratively, all we could do is look at ourselves in the mirror because we allowed that and supported that in some regards to happen. So, what are some of those agile numbers? Well, if we see a situation in the plant that could be improved, we can sit down within 15 minutes in the conference room with all the commercial team and the ops team, maintenance, whatever it is, and we can openly discuss what the situation is, what is the plan to address it, what impact does it currently have on the business, and what it could improve or avoid in the future. And we can walk out of that room in 15 minutes and we can go straight to action. I don't think that's specifically unique, but to get the buy-in to be able to cross over into other people's functions and understand it from their perspective and to have everyone have a voice in the room, I think that's an example of what makes it, for me, much more unique in the small, single entity type business, being that we're all here. And that was critical. I mean, there's no problems with remote and other things, and we balance that. But, we wanted a team that put your hand in the pile and you're here every day.
Yeah. So a couple of things I want to pull through for the listeners. First and foremost, I think what I'm hearing is agility is a choice. And that if bureaucracy seeps into your organization, if you're a startup and you're building it from scratch and you're putting your thumbprints on it, to use your words from earlier, Erik, if it's your fingerprints on the business and it's a business that is built around silos and fiefdoms and bureaucracy and the need to call back for permission, that's a choice that you made, either intentionally or unintentionally, consciously or unconsciously. It's a series of choices you made that created that culture. Conversely, the large organizations are not monoliths. And so while some folks, and I worked with units where I felt a high degree of entrepreneurial spirit and that we could take decisions and run with it and try. And if we failed, explain ourselves, learn the lesson, do something different. And other places where it was very hierarchical and you had to kind of get clearance for lots of things. But I think you've kind of cut through an important point there, is that it's the large organizations are not uniformly or universally bureaucratic in all aspects of their operations. They're not a monolith. And so even the presumption that with a lack of size comes agility or with scale comes bureaucracy, both of those things could be proven false depending on the organization, the context, and the role that you have.
I believe that. I think it is a choice, and it's how do you go about building trust, earning respect, keeping all channels of communications open, but yet being able to check ego or other things at the door. And hey, there's times we have healthy debate, and we have sometimes some pointed discussions, but that's natural and that's part of the business. And our team is highly experienced and have gone through many of these things before. So you might not walk out of the room happy, but at the end of the day, everybody had an input, and here's the decision we're making in the best interest of the business.
I love it. So something I want to ask you about here, I alluded to it earlier. You commented on it in the very start of our discussion, but I am fascinated by the notion of standing up a business amid dense and fierce competition. So I had asked the question at the outset, why Northwest Iowa? I didn't ask why because if they don't grow anything there, they obviously do. I spent a lot of time there. My half of my family is from Northwestern Iowa, so very familiar with the trade area. It was more of a for goodness sakes, that seems like a mature market with a lot of established relationships and supply chains and the way things work. And what's the cost of the self-inflicted cost of disruption, of being the disruptor. So again, Northwest Iowa, highly productive trade area, robust meal demand, as you said, access to Class 1 railway via the CN, so it allows you to move production out as well as bring it back in if you switch from a surplus or deficit environment. But because of all those things, it's already pre-populated, densely populated with co-ops and other folks that, commercials and processors, et cetera. So I guess my question here is, how did you, Erik, approach the challenge of standing up that business right in the middle of that pre-existing competition? You talked a little bit about how you differentiated, but just physically establishing yourself, doing something different, but also recognizing that you need to preserve relationships with the competition, right? I think I'm going to say it's probably relatively easy to transact with the producer once you've established trust. Because if you're executing well, they stand to gain from your presence. That's not universally true for every other counterparty in that geography. So, what are your reflections on that challenge, and what have you learned?
What we learned, and again, we decided from a strategy and a tactical perspective, we had many relationships to build and balance while we were trying to bring this business to life. We're the new kid on the block, so to speak. I mean, it was known, there was announcements, there was physical assets being built, but no one knew who Erik was or who Jay is or Scott or whomever. So, we had to be proactive in that community. And at the end of the day, people here, both, community members, farmer producers, customers, co-ops, they wanted to know who we are, what do we stand for, what are our priorities, and how will we conduct ourselves? And we're measured on that every day by our actions. So it just happened one day. I had a gentleman ask me to come to a Kiwanis Club meeting. And, I knew going through the planning process for this plant, there were public meetings and, some went better than others. But I thought, all right, well, let me go. He's like, we get 8 to 10 people. I show up and there's 30 plus. And they did openly say there's a reporter from the local news here. And I just tried to be open and honest, give them an overview, 15 minutes at the most, and answered questions for another 30. And just trying to introduce myself and how I saw my vision of the business and how I wanted it to run, that picked up. Again, some of that, it started building inertia. And then we did other Kiwanis clubs. We did Rotary clubs. We did it outside of Storm Lake Alta. We've had farmer producer winter meetings 2 years in a row in 7 or 8 different locations that are within 30, 40 miles of us, with commercial leadership, with operational leadership there, just getting to know people and having those hallway water cooler conversations, I think go a long way. And we found ahead of our first full harvest, we reaped the benefits of that because we did a farmer producer open house. We've never had a grand opening or any of those things, but we did that so we could get people registered. We could get them acclimated with site and flows. We had over 350 attendees, and that's turned into now there's over 1,500 individual farmer producer customers that are registered in our ERP system. So, that's the individual side of it. From the commercial and the cooperative side of it, again, we had to build those relationships. And all of them are both suppliers and customers of ours. Our first year margin environment was choppy. Our, operational output was always questionable. How quickly and how well do you start up? How reliable can you run? We didn't do a tremendous amount of sales business with them until we got our feet going and found our cadence. But now we start seeing the symbiotic relationship with them. It is competitive, but I think in many regards, there's still a complementary relationship there because they can bring beans, they can turn right around and they can take meal back out. So, there's probably 4 large ones that we work with on a daily basis, and maybe not as much during harvest, but, farmers still bring beans to us in non-harvest windows, but, we do have a lot of commercial beans. So it's been a delicate balance, but I think it was very much a well-planned, or at least a planned approach that turned out well.
So thank you for that. Have you been confronted yet with the challenge of, I'm going to presume that Northwestern Iowa has largely, if not exclusively, always been a trade area of surplus. But you mentioned earlier that the CN does provide you the opportunity to bring beans in, should that be required. Does an operator like Platinum being built right in the middle of that competitive trade area, is there a chance that it could create a deficit environment whereby you will have a unique advantage being able to bring in beans? That also creates opportunity for everybody in the marketplace, right? If you become a deficit environment. So
it does. And I think it's really going to depend on the global S&D, and the balance sheet of where beans flow. I mean, there's a lot of noise going on right now. There's a lot of unknowns of how that's going to move. I think the ability to bring in beans and have a partner, a railroad that helps make businesses, if there's a drought situation, if it makes economic sense for us to send a unit train to export of meal and then backhaul beans, we look at all those things. There's not one prescribed method of here's how we're going to procure our beans, but our team's constantly looking at, we're fighting for pennies. We literally are, and those are important to us, but we can't forget about that every decision we make could have some type of consequence. So, we're balancing that.
And to the listeners, we're not actively avoiding discussions of 45Z and renewable volume obligations, et cetera. We decided when Eric and I met earlier this summer that perhaps a more interesting conversation would be the history of a business and starting it up. we'll invite Erik back to pontificate on where 45Z lands here in 6 months or a year from now and where the market's at. Erik, this has all been incredibly helpful. As we close out today, and maybe you've already pointed to this in our conversation, maybe you haven't. I'd love to close with, from your standpoint, what's been the single biggest thing that you've learned or perhaps relearned as a leader in agribusiness in this whole startup process?
It's really working with people. You don't take it for granted, but that's a lesson you learn throughout your journey in life, is how to work with people, how to listen, how to not and hear what they have to say and empower people. And the team that we've been able to build here, I think everyone has that same viewpoint. And we talked reverse trajectory. I mean, many of these people have had that, but we found people that fit, within an organization from a skill set. That's great. That's what transacts a business. But this group has been the ones that have started building the foundation for, again, how others define our culture. So, first and foremost, it's get good people, find good people. We kind of joke the first couple of us, we all got our number one draft pick. My number one draft pick might have said no the first time, but ultimately ended up here. And I think that when we look at these relationships that we have had and are still building and developing, it's taken on a whole different level of importance. And I think that I saw that throughout the journey, didn't prioritize it as much early on. It's about climbing within a large organization, and that's results-based. But having the opportunity to learn to be comfortable in uncomfortable positions, to move around so much, to work globally, to transition through to a medium-sized company and figure that out, and then to come in here and be surrounded by people that are cut from the same cloth, so to speak, that you are, and ag is the priority. That it's not just a job; it really is a purpose, and I think that's the lesson learned. And in the future, if there's other opportunities, continue that, or how do we pass that on to the next group, this next generation? That's probably the thing that I've learned the most of over 30 years.
Yeah, that's a wonderful place to leave it. And I don't want to put words in your mouth, but you said earlier on that, building the plant was the easy part. And I think about the idea of building a large physical asset or building a team and a culture. And one of them fits nicely in a Gantt chart. Yeah. One of them can be plugged into a financial model and tell you what the return is going to be and when you should expect to hit it if your assumptions are correct. The other one is just grinding work every single day and dealing with, the messy nature of emotions and people's incentives and people's aspirations and the things they have going on. And so I think that anyone who's starting up a business who loses sight of, do we have the right people with the right skills, the right behaviors, building the right culture, losing sight of that while focusing on more repeatable processes is going to pay a price at some point in the journey. So I think that's a wonderful place to leave it. Erik, I want to say thank you very much for taking the time to join us today. You guys are going into your second official full harvest. So I know your time's at a premium this time of year. You guys are constantly iterating and reinvesting. And so just wanted to say thank you for taking the time and thank you for being a part of the Pacesetter Pod today.
Joe, it was my pleasure joining you today and talking about Platinum Crush and our place in the U.S. soybean crushing industry. So thank you.
Absolutely. And we'll have links to Platinum Crush and to you in the show notes. As we leave today, listeners, thank you as always for tuning into today's episode. I hope that you found something not just of interest, but of actionable value in our conversation today. And if you did, I'd ask you to do one thing, and that's consider sharing this episode with someone else who you think would find similar benefit. It's the very best way you can support the show and help us elevate thinking around strategy execution across the ag supply chain. Thanks again for joining. I look forward to having you right here next time on the Pacesetter Pod.
This is the podcastfactory.com.